morning to you.
Good morning.
I just want to ask you first of all, Gordon, about this Shamima Begum story, which is getting a lot of attention, a lot of furious feedback, I have to say, from our viewers. What is your position? If you were the British Prime Minister, would you feel comfortable about keeping her in this Syrian camp, or would you feel a moral and legal obligation to let her come back?
I think the issue here is, do you change the law for one person? And I don't think you can. I mean, I saw some of what you and Susanna were saying, and I appreciate the very strong feelings that people have. I don't think you can just go about changing the law for one person. So I think we've got to go through all the processes of law, but I wouldn't like to be the Prime Minister who changed the law for one person.
What do you mean when you say change the law? For what, in what way?
You mean we're making an exception for her that we shouldn't be making?
Yes, I don't think you can make an exception. I think all this has got to go properly through the courts, and all this has got to be dealt with by the judicial system. I think if a Prime Minister or a Home Secretary steps in this respect, I think you're trying to change the law for one person. I think that's not the right thing to do.
So by implication, if you were the Prime Minister now, you would be wanting her to come back and be able to contest her case here?
No, I would like the courts to deal with this issue, and I wouldn't like politicians to intervene in this. I would like this to be a matter for the courts. You see, if you start changing the law for just one person for one special case, then you get into all sorts of difficulties later on.
But in a way, what they've done, the courts, is they've created a kind of limbo land. They've supported the Home Secretary at the time, Sajid Javid, and they've created a limbo where she is now kept in Syria. She can't come back to defend herself, but she can't really get out of that camp. Do you think that is the right thing?
Well, there are other ways of doing this. You could run an appeal from the camp itself. You could do a number of different things. But what I'm saying is very dangerous when you take one case and you then try to make new laws or new procedures based on one single case. Clearly, the public are angry with what she's said. Clearly, she left the country to support terrorist organizations. Clearly, the due processes of law that we have should be gone through, and that's where I would leave it.
Okay. I want to just talk to you about this budget that's coming on Wednesday. Interesting story that's just dropped on the Financial Times that the UK's rapid rollout of the COVID-19 vaccines will foster a faster economic recovery, requiring fewer tax rises than feared, official budget forecasts will show this week. And that follows the development that now 20 million people have received at least one of the vaccine doses. You can see the polls, the Tories are beginning to widen their lead against Labour due to what many believe has been ineffectual opposition by Keir Starmer, in particular the leader. You can see a situation here where Boris Johnson, having had a nightmare year, and many people believe, in his handling of the pandemic, on the back of this extraordinary vaccine rollout success and the financial benefits that will bring in terms of not the big hole that we may have feared at one stage, that this could all be very good news for the Prime Minister. What's your response?
Well, this is the first day of spring. We want hope. I think we need a plan. I think we've got a plan for getting the country out of the lockdown, but I don't think we've got an economic plan, and that's what people will want to look at the budget for. And the key thing is to return to growth. Now, the first thing is you can't return to growth. We've had a marvellous success with vaccination. Now, I've been vaccinated. Sarah's to be vaccinated today. I talked to Tony Blair. He's been vaccinated. So people are being vaccinated. But you cannot give up on test, tracking and trace. And we've seen this in the last day with what's happened with the Brazilian variant. And I'm very surprised that this test happened about 3 weeks ago. And this is the first time we're talking about tracing the person who actually has not been found and put his form in the wrong way.
Well, that's an interesting point that you make there. Do you understand what happened there? Because I think we're all baffled about having a test, trace and isolate system where you get tested, you test positive, that positive is actually a new variant which could be very threatening. We don't know. And they cannot trace or isolate the person who underwent that test.
Well, I've got some questions to ask about the quarantine and whether it's effective. I also know that we're brilliant at genetic sequencing, which you've got to do to find out what kind of variant this is, but it seems to take a lot of time. And I think it's got to be speeded up. You've got to have some of these machines in different parts of the country, and then you've got to have a better tracking system. And so it is very strange that if someone came back into the country 3 weeks ago and they had this variant, and only now, when they could have spread it quite widely, are we looking at where they are going to be, or where they are and where we can get them. So the vaccination has gone brilliantly, but we've got to not take our eye off the ball, that you've got to test, track and trace. Now, that is the start of an economic recovery. If you can get out of the vaccine, the disease under control, then you can plan, and then what you've got to do is get growth in the economy. You concentrate on where you're good, which is in science, and where we can do well on the environment and renewables, but you cannot allow hundreds of thousands of young people, perhaps 1 million young people, to be out of work, doing nothing, sitting at home, isolated, desolate, mental health problems. And I was very surprised when I found that only 2,000 young people have been taken on what is called the Kickstart program. 1 million probably out of work, 2,000 taken on in the last few months. We've got to do better than that.
What do you want to see from Rishi Sunak? Last time we spoke to you, you hadn't had any conversations with him at all, which I found extraordinary, given your experience of handling the financial crisis. Have you spoken to
You
him
haven't
since?
encouraged him to phone me since.
Have you had any?
You haven't encouraged him to phone me.
I mean, I find that
You
extraordinary.
have to be the intermediary there.
You've had no conversation at all with Rishi Sunak.
No, I haven't actually. But I would suggest to him that he needs this plan. And you have got to get Kickstart and Restart, because, look, we've got last summer's school leavers, next summer's school leavers coming, last summer's graduates, coming summer's graduates, a pile-up of young people, 4.5 million on furlough, perhaps 1 million of these may not be kept on in their current job, and you've got to move very quickly. We've seen this problem coming for a year, and we have not done enough about it. So get back to growth, concentrate on getting people into jobs, and then of course you can deal with some of the other problems that will arise as you plan your recovery.
Could you see, Gordon, a situation where if this 4-part roadmap ending on June the 21st is successful, and we basically get our freedom back from June the 22nd onwards, and it's a big if, because we don't know what's going to happen with other variations and so on, but if we do get to that position, could you see a situation where, although there have been millions of people very badly affected by this, there have also been millions of people, possibly tens of millions of people, who've been sitting at home, not spending much money, desperate to get out and spend it in the high street, holidays, and so on and so on. Could we see a kind of, turbocharged rebound of the economy if we're able to hit this roadmap dates?
Yeah, there will be a bounce back, and it will mean that people will spend some of the money that they've been holding back. But I think the problem that the Bank of England identified a few days ago is that 70% of people are still worried about the future and will not put their savings out there until they're absolutely sure that their job is secure, that the company they're working for is going to stay in business, that there's a real return to economic growth on the long term and not just for a few weeks. So it's the long-term plan for recovery. I think the Chancellor's done well when he did the initial work to have the rescue operation. I don't think he's done so well on planning the recovery. And as I found when I was Prime Minister, you've got to be 2 steps ahead. You can't be behind the curve. You've got to be ahead of it. And we should be planning on how the new jobs are going to be created in the future. And I come back to the long-term unemployed, because if we allow a generation of people to be unemployed for a year or 18 months, which is what is happening, then you never get people back to work in the way that you want. And you have all the social problems that arise from that. We've really got to do better in planning this future, so that every person, you've talked a lot about 2 young people today, Meghan and Harry. I'm talking about 1 million young people who need the help that we haven't yet given them.
Do you have a view on Meghan and
Now
Harry?
you've mentioned them, do you think they've had it tougher than the rest of us?
Of course, I think even they would admit that that's not the case. I think we've got to think about a whole country coming together again, and we've got to think, if we exclude so many young people from the possibility of getting jobs in the near term, then we are destroying the unity, the harmony of the country. We've really got to work. I've talked to chambers of commerce, I've heard from different organisations, because I'm interested in what's happening to young people and to the future. And people are worried that there's just not enough momentum, not enough drive, not enough advertising, not enough employers encouraged to take people on. There's a great willingness to do things, But the government really has got to get its act together in a far quicker way than it's done.
You mentioned, Gordon Brown, that you haven't spoken to Rishi Sunak. Have you spoken to Keir Starmer? Because you mentioned momentum and drive, and those are two things that a lot of people feel that the current Labour leader lack. Have you had a conversation with him?
Yeah, I've talked to Keir. You'll find him humorous, very passionate about what he's doing, someone who's got a vision for the future, and perhaps what he's done in the first year, and it's completely understandable, he is concentrated on showing that he would be a competent leader of this country, that he would get things right, he would take things seriously, he would make the right judgments, he would take every issue on its merits and look at it very carefully. And I think perhaps he's paying a price because he has been so successful in showing that he's competent that people will say, well, where's the next thing? Where's the vision? And I think he'll show that in the next few months.
I think he's got to take the gloves off and be a proper leader of the opposition, I'm afraid. I think too often he's looked like he disagrees with the government but then always votes with them. And I think in the pandemic you've got to be a little bit bolder than that. And I think the problem is he doesn't seem to be inspiring people. The polls are going the wrong way for him, which when you think of the year that Boris Johnson's had, the idea that the Tories would now be extending their lead over Labour, I find quite staggering. But I'm afraid you've got to put the buck stopping it with Keir Starmer, haven't you?
Yeah, but I think, Piers, there's so much water gone under the bridge and so much still to go under the bridge. I think you'll judge what Keir and others are doing at the end of this crisis and then what they're saying about the future. It's really difficult being the leader of the opposition because you want the country to be united. You want the country to work together. You want to support the government in what is a national crisis, but you've got a duty to point out where they're wrong. So Keir is trying to balance that, but he's shown he's competent. I think he's got that vision for the future. Look, I think we'll find, 10 years of underfunding of the health service have caused some of the problems we've got. We need a 10-year plan for the health service. Keir's the guy to do that. There's too much, Dominic Cummings stuff, one law for the top people and one law for the rest. And I think people feel strongly about that and are fed up with that. And I think Keir can show that greater fairness and inclusivity is part of what he can do. So I think on the big themes, he will come through over the next few months.
Okay. Well, we'll see if you're right. Gordon Brown, always good to talk to you. Thank you very much. And wish Sarah all the best with her vaccination today.
Thank you, Keir. Thank you, Piers.
I'm not the Labour leader yet, Gordon.
No.
Let's just give it time.
Nor is he Prime Minister.
There was a recent poll that said I should be.
Stilton, thanks very much indeed. Good to see you as the sun